There's a gravestone in rural Massachusetts that no one in town will talk about. It sits at the edge of an old cemetery, weathered and half swallowed by moss. The inscription is simple: Eleanor Whitlock, beloved daughter, aged 15 years, 11 months, 29 days. If you look closer, you'll notice something the locals pray you won't. 3 rows behind it, there's another stone: Margaret Whitlock, cherished daughter, aged 15 years, 7 months, 12 days, and another, Catherine Whitlock, taken too soon, aged 14 years, 10 months, 6 days, 7 stones in total, 7 daughters, all dead before their 16th birthday, all within the same bloodline. The Whitlock curse wasn't folklore. It was documented, witnessed, and covered up by a community that decided some secrets are better left buried. But in 1968, something changed. The 8th daughter lived, and what she did to survive has never been spoken of publicly until now. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. The Whitlock family first appeared in New England records in 1793. They were farmers, modest people, who kept to themselves in a township called Ashford Hollow, a place so small it doesn't appear on modern maps. The family was unremarkable in most ways, hardworking, God-fearing. But there was something the neighbors noticed early on. The Whitlock daughters never grew old, not a single one. In 1806, the first recorded death occurred. A girl named Prudence Whitlock, aged 15 years and 4 months, died in her sleep. No explanation, no illness. The town physician wrote natural causes in his ledger, though privately he admitted to his wife that the girl's body showed no signs of disease, no trauma, nothing that would explain her sudden death. She simply stopped breathing. Her mother, Ruth Whitlock, became a ghost in her own home. Neighbors reported hearing her weeping at night, calling Prudence's name through the walls. But Ruth had 2 more daughters. Surely people thought this was an isolated tragedy. It wasn't. 4 years later, Ruth Whitlock's 2nd daughter, Abigail, died 3 weeks before her 16th birthday. This time, the circumstances were even stranger. Abigail had been seen that morning gathering eggs from the henhouse, healthy and humming to herself. By afternoon, she complained of feeling cold. By evening, she was dead. The town physician was called again. He examined the body and found nothing: no fever, no discoloration. Her heart had simply stopped. He wrote in his journal in handwriting that grew increasingly erratic across the page, "I cannot explain this. The girl was sound. There is no medical rationale. It is as though something reached inside her chest and switched her off like a lantern." Ruth's 3rd daughter, Constance, didn't make it past 14. She died in 1815 on a bright Sunday morning while sitting in church. Witnesses said she was singing a hymn when her voice faltered. She clutched the pew in front of her, gasped once, and collapsed. By the time they carried her outside, she was gone. 3 daughters, 3 deaths, all before 16. The town began to whisper. Ruth Whitlock never recovered. She stopped attending church, stopped speaking to neighbors. Her husband, Thomas, tried to keep the family together, but the weight of it crushed him. He died in 1817, and the official cause was listed as heart failure. But those who knew him said he died of guilt. Guilt for bringing those girls into the world. Guilt for watching them die. Ruth lived another 6 years alone in that farmhouse. And when she finally passed in 1823, the town breathed a sigh of relief. They thought the curse had died with her. But curses don't die. They pass down. Ruth's younger brother, Samuel Whitlock, had a daughter. Her name was Lydia. And in 1839, at the age of 15 years and 8 months, Lydia Whitlock died in her sleep. Same symptoms, same sudden stop, same unexplainable silence in the body. The physician who examined her was the son of the man who had examined Prudence decades earlier. He found his father's old journal and read the entries. Then he closed the book, walked out of the Whitlock house, and refused to ever speak of it again. By the mid-1800s, the Whitlock name carried a shadow. People in Ashford Hollow stopped marrying into the family. They stopped inviting them to gatherings. If a Whitlock daughter was born, the town mourned her in advance. They didn't wait for her to die. They simply accepted that she would. The family became isolated, feared, and in some corners despised. There were rumors that the Whitlocks had made a pact with something unholy, that their daughters were being claimed by a debt unpaid. Others believed it was a genetic disease, something in the blood that medical science hadn't yet discovered. But none of that explained the precision. Why always before 16? Why only daughters? Why never sons? The pattern was too deliberate, too ritualistic. It felt less like biology and more like punishment. In 1862, during the height of the Civil War, a woman named Miriam Whitlock gave birth to twin daughters. The town received the news with dread. 2 girls, 2 deaths waiting to happen. Miriam named them Clara and Rose. She loved them fiercely, desperately. As if love alone could break whatever held her bloodline hostage, she kept them close. She never let them wander far from the house. She watched them sleep, terrified that if she looked away, even for a moment, they would slip through her fingers. Clara died first. She was 15 years, 2 months, and 9 days old. It happened in the kitchen. She was kneading dough when her hands went still. She looked at her mother, confused, and said, "Mama, I can't feel my heartbeat." Then she fell. Rose lasted 3 months longer. She made it to 15 years and 5 months. She died while braiding her hair. Just stopped mid-motion, the ribbon still clutched in her hand. Miriam buried both daughters in the family plot and then walked into the woods. They found her body a week later, hanging from an oak tree. The town didn't speak of it. They never did. The Whitlock line should have ended there. But Miriam had a younger sister, Josephine, who had married a man from a neighboring county. Josephine had spent her life trying to distance herself from the family name. She never used Whitlock in public. She raised her daughter, Evelyn, far from Ashford Hollow, hoping distance would break the curse. It didn't. Evelyn Whitlock died in 1891 at the age of 15 years and 10 months. She had been living in Boston, attending a school for young women far removed from the dark history of her bloodline. But geography didn't matter. On a cold November night, Evelyn woke from a nightmare. Gasping for air, her roommate tried to help her, but Evelyn's eyes were wide and distant, as though she were seeing something no one else could. She whispered, "It's here. It's always been here." Then she died. The death was ruled a heart defect, but Evelyn's mother knew better. Josephine returned to Ashford Hollow for the first time in decades, to bury her daughter in the family plot. She stood over the grave and spoke to no one, but those nearby heard her say, "We were never meant to keep them." By the early 1900s, the Whitlock curse had become a ghost story. Older generations remembered it, but younger people dismissed it as superstition. The family had scattered. Most had changed their names. A few moved west, hoping the American frontier would offer them escape. But the curse didn't care about names or distance. In 1924, a girl named Helen Cartwright died in Oregon at the age of 15 years, 6 months, and 3 days. Her mother's maiden name was Whitlock. In 1941, a girl named Dorothy Brennan died in Illinois, 15 years and 9 months old. Her grandmother had been a Whitlock. The deaths were no longer clustered in one town. They were spread across the country, hidden in medical records, dismissed as coincidences. But if you traced the genealogy, if you followed the maternal line, the pattern never broke. Every daughter, every generation, dead before 16. By the 1950s, the Whitlock name had all but disappeared from public record. The family had splintered so completely that most descendants didn't even know they carried the bloodline. But in 1953, a woman named Virginia Shaw gave birth to a daughter in a small town in Vermont. Virginia's maiden name was Whitlock, though she rarely mentioned it. Her own mother had died young and her grandmother before that. But Virginia had been told it was poor health, bad luck. Nothing more. She named her daughter Caroline. Caroline Shaw grew up healthy, bright, and curious. She loved to read. She kept a journal. She drew pictures of birds and wrote poetry about the seasons. Her mother adored her. For 15 years, Virginia allowed herself to believe that whatever darkness had touched her family had finally burned itself out. But 3 weeks before Caroline's 16th birthday, something changed. Caroline began having nightmares. She told her mother she dreamed of a woman standing at the foot of her bed, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, watching her in silence. Virginia dismissed it as adolescent anxiety, but the nightmares worsened. Caroline started waking up gasping, clutching her chest, saying she couldn't breathe. Her mother took her to a doctor. The doctor found nothing wrong. Her heart was strong. Her lungs were clear. He suggested stress, perhaps school pressure, and sent her home with a prescription for mild sedatives. But Carolyn knew. She told her best friend, a girl named Susan, that she was going to die. Susan laughed it off, but Caroline didn't. She said, "It's in my blood. I can feel it coming." On March 19, 1969, 6 days before her 16th birthday, Caroline Shaw died in her sleep. Her mother found her in the morning, still tucked beneath her blankets, peaceful, as though she'd simply decided not to wake up. The autopsy revealed nothing. No drugs, no trauma, no explanation. The medical examiner wrote, "Sudden cardiac arrest, cause unknown." But Virginia knew. She tore through old family documents, boxes of letters, and records her mother had left behind. And there, buried in a trunk in the attic, she found it, a genealogy chart. 7 generations of daughters, 7 generations of deaths, all before 16, all Whitlocks. Virginia Shaw did what so many before her had done. She tried to bury it. She burned the documents. She never spoke of it again. But Caroline had a cousin, a girl named Rebecca, born in 1955 to Virginia's younger sister, Diane. Diane had married young, moved to Pennsylvania, and rarely came back to Vermont. She didn't know about Caroline's death until weeks after the funeral, and she didn't connect it to her own daughter until it was too late. Rebecca was a quiet girl, more reserved than Caroline had been. She spent most of her time alone, reading or walking in the woods near her house. But in 1970, when Rebecca turned 15, she began to change. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. Her mother asked what was wrong, and Rebecca said, "I keep hearing someone calling my name, but when I look, no one's there." Diane took her to doctors, psychiatrists. No one could find anything wrong. And then on a Sunday morning in August, Rebecca collapsed in the hallway of her home. She was 15 years, 11 months, and 18 days old. She died before the ambulance arrived. Diane never recovered. She spent the rest of her life trying to understand what had taken her daughter. She became obsessed with family history, tracking down distant relatives, piecing together a genealogy that stretched back over a century and a half. What she found horrified her. 7 daughters, 7 deaths, all in the maternal line, all before 16. And then she discovered something else. She had a niece, a girl born in 1954 to her arranged older brother Thomas. The girl's name was Margaret Whitlock. And in 1970, Margaret was turning 16. Diane tried to reach out. She called. She wrote letters. But Thomas wanted nothing to do with her. He thought she was insane, grief-stricken, grasping at conspiracy to make sense of Rebecca's death. He told her to leave his family alone. So Diane did the only thing she could. She drove to Thomas's house in New Hampshire and knocked on the door. When he refused to let her in, she stood on the porch and shouted the truth. She told him about the deaths, about the pattern, about the curse. Thomas slammed the door in her face, but Margaret heard everything. Margaret Whitlock was not like the other daughters. She was sharp, skeptical, and deeply uncomfortable with anything she couldn't explain. When her Aunt Diane showed up ranting about curses and dead girls, Margaret's first instinct was to dismiss it. But something about the desperation in Diane's voice lingered. That night, Margaret asked her father about the family. Thomas refused to talk. He told her Diane was unwell. That grief had broken her mind, and that Margaret should forget the whole thing. But Margaret didn't forget. She went to the library. She searched through old newspaper archives, census records, death certificates, and she found them. Prudence, Abigail, Constance, Lydia, Clara, Rose, Evelyn, Caroline, Rebecca, all dead before 16. All Whitlocks, all daughters. Margaret's 16th birthday was 3 months away, and for the first time in her life, she was afraid. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments what would you have done if this was your bloodline. Margaret didn't tell her parents what she'd found. She didn't tell anyone. Instead, she began preparing. She read everything she could about folklore, curses, family hauntings. She found references to bloodline curses in colonial New England, stories of families marked by deals made generations ago, debts that passed from mother to daughter like heirlooms. Most of it felt like superstition, but Margaret wasn't interested in belief. She was interested in survival. She started keeping a journal documenting every strange occurrence. The nightmares began in December. Just like Caroline's had, Margaret dreamed of a woman standing in the corner of her room, dressed in old tattered clothing, watching her with hollow eyes. The woman never spoke. She just stared, and every night she moved closer. By January, Margaret was waking up gasping, her chest tight, her heart pounding. But unlike the others, Margaret didn't go to a doctor. She didn't ask for help. She decided to face it head-on. On the night of February 14, 1971, 3 weeks before her 16th birthday, Margaret Whitlock did something no other daughter in her bloodline had ever done. She went to the family graveyard. It was a small plot overgrown and forgotten, tucked behind what remained of the original Whitlock homestead in Massachusetts. Margaret had driven there alone, in the middle of the night with nothing but a flashlight and a backpack full of things she'd gathered over the past 2 months. Salt, candles, a knife, a copy of her family tree drawn in her own hand. She stood in front of the oldest grave she could find, the stone so weathered the name was barely legible, and she spoke aloud. She said, "I know you're here. I know you've been taking us, and I know you're coming for me." The air went still, the kind of stillness that doesn't feel natural. Margaret lit the candles she'd brought and placed them in a circle around herself. Then she did something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She cut her palm with the knife and let the blood drip onto the grave. She didn't know if it would work. She didn't know if any of it meant anything, but Margaret had read enough old folklore to understand one thing. Curses are contracts, and contracts can be renegotiated. She spoke into the silence. She said, "You've taken enough. You've had 7 generations, 8 daughters, but I'm not going to be the 9th. If you want me, you're going to have to face me." And then she waited. For hours she sat in that graveyard, surrounded by candles, her hand wrapped in cloth, her breath visible in the freezing air. Nothing happened. No ghost appeared. No voice answered. The sun began to rise, and Margaret felt foolish, exhausted, and terrified that she'd wasted her only chance. She gathered her things and drove home. But when she walked through the door of her house, something was different. The air felt lighter. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for months was gone. She slept that night without nightmares, and 3 weeks later, on March 7, 1971, Margaret Whitlock turned 16. She woke up that morning expecting to die. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for her heart to stop, waiting for the cold to creep into her limbs. But nothing happened. The hours passed. Afternoon came, evening, and Margaret was still alive. Her father knocked on her door and asked if she wanted cake. She laughed. It was a strange broken sound, but it was real. She was 16 and she was alive. The curse had broken, but Margaret never spoke about what she'd done that night in the graveyard. Not to her father, not to her Aunt Diane, who wept with relief when she heard Margaret had survived. Not to anyone, because Margaret knew something the others didn't. She knew that breaking a curse doesn't mean it's gone. It just means it's sleeping, and she spent the rest of her life making sure it stayed that way. Margaret Whitlock lived a quiet life after that. She never married. She never had children. She kept the family name, but refused to pass it on. She worked as a librarian in a small town in Maine, far from the graves in Massachusetts, far from the history that had tried to claim her. She kept journals, dozens of them, documenting everything she'd learned about her family, about the curse, about the night she faced it. When she died in 2003 at the age of 49, those journals were found in a locked box beneath her bed. Her cousin's daughter, a woman named Emily, inherited them. Emily read them cover to cover, and when she finished, she burned them. She said later that some stories aren't meant to survive, that some truths are too heavy to carry. But before she burned them, Emily copied one page, a single entry dated March 7, 1971. It read, "I am 16 today. I am alive, but I heard her voice last night. She said, 'You didn't break it. You only delayed it. And when you're gone, it will remember.'" Margaret Whitlock never had children, but the bloodline didn't end with her. There were others, distant cousins. daughters born to women who didn't know they carried the Whitlock name in their veins. In 1987, a girl named Sarah Drummond died in Texas at the age of 15 years and 7 months. Her great-grandmother had been a Whitlock. In 1993, a girl named Jessica Hale died in Florida, 15 years and 11 months old. Her mother's mother had been born a Whitlock, but changed her name after marriage. The deaths were scattered, isolated, written off as tragic coincidences. But if you trace the genealogy, if you followed the thread back far enough, they were all connected. The curse hadn't ended. It had simply gone quiet. Margaret had done something that night in the graveyard, something that gave her life but didn't destroy what haunted her family. She had bargained, she had delayed, and when she died, the debt came due again. Emily, the cousin who inherited Margaret's journals, never had daughters. She made that choice deliberately. She married, but she and her husband never tried for children. She told friends she didn't want to pass anything on. Not genes, not history, not names. When people asked why, she smiled and said she preferred a quiet life. But those who knew her well said she seemed haunted, that she would sometimes wake in the middle of the night and walk through her house, checking locks, lighting candles as though preparing for something she knew was coming. Emily died in 2019 at the age of 52 from a sudden heart attack. The doctors said it was unexpected, but not suspicious. Her heart simply stopped. She was alone when it happened, and when her husband found her, he said her face looked peaceful, but her hand was clutched around something, a piece of paper. On it, she had written a single line: "I'm sorry. I tried to end it, but the bloodline continues. There are still daughters, still Whitlocks, even if they don't carry the name." In 2008, a girl named Amanda Cross died in Oregon at 15 years and 9 months. Her mother had no idea her grandmother's maiden name was Whitlock. In 2015, a girl named Lily Bennett died in Georgia, 15 years, 10 months, and 14 days old. Her family had never heard of the curse. They buried her, believing it was a congenital heart defect, a tragedy, nothing more. And in 2022, a girl named Grace Ellison celebrated her 16th birthday. Her mother's side of the family descended from a Whitlock daughter born in 1873. Grace is alive today. She doesn't know about the curse. She doesn't know about the graves. She doesn't know that 7 generations of daughters tried to survive and failed. She's 21 now, living in California, studying marine biology, planning a future she believes is hers to shape. But those who have studied the Whitlock genealogy know the truth. Grace isn't safe. None of them are. The curse doesn't end. It waits. Margaret Whitlock understood something that the others didn't. She understood that survival isn't the same as freedom. She survived because she faced the curse, directly because she forced it to see her as something other than a victim. But she also understood that what haunted her family wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a demon or a disease. It was something older, something woven into the bloodline itself, passed down like eye color or the shape of a jawline, a debt that had never been named, a contract signed in blood so long ago that no one remembered the terms. And because no one remembered, no one could end it. All they could do was survive it one generation at a time, hoping they would be the exception. Margaret was the exception, but she paid for it. She lived her entire life looking over her shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop, knowing that when she died, the curse would wake again. And it did. The story of the Whitlock curse isn't over. It never will be. Because somewhere right now, there's a girl who doesn't know she's a Whitlock. A girl who is 14 or 15 or just about to turn 16. A girl who is starting to have nightmares, who is waking up gasping, who feels something watching her from the corner of her room and she has no idea why. The Whitlock family tried to bury this story. They scattered across the country, changed their names, burned the records, and pretended the past didn't exist. But the past doesn't forget. It waits in the blood. It waits in the names carved on gravestones no one visits anymore. And it waits for the next daughter. Margaret Whitlock broke the curse for herself, but she couldn't break it for them. And so the cycle continues, unseen, unspoken, waiting for the next girl who will have to choose between facing the dark or letting it take her. If you know a Whitlock, if you've ever heard the name whispered in your family tree, pay attention. Watch the daughters and pray they make it to